Psalm 119, Day 21, Dominion over me. We'll be reading today from verses 129 through 136. Your testimonies are wonderful, therefore my soul keeps them. The unfolding of your words gives light, it imparts understanding to the simple. I open my mouth and pant because I long for your commandments. Turn to me and be gracious to me, as in your way with those who love your name. Keep steady my steps according to your promise, and let no iniquity get dominion over me. Redeem me from man's oppression, that I may keep your precepts. Make your face shine upon your servant, and teach me your statutes. My eyes shed streams of tears because people do not keep your law. Our thoughts today center around verse 133. Keep steady my steps according to your promise. Let no iniquity get dominion over me. If you go back through this psalm and make note of the times the psalmist makes reference to the guidance of his journey he desires from God and his word, you might find things such as verse 3, walking in his ways, verse 5, his steadfast ways, verse 9, a young man keeping his ways, verse 32, running in the way of your commandments. Verse 35, lead me in the path of your commandments. Verse 45, I shall walk in wide places. Verse 59, I turn my feet to your testimonies. You get the idea. He alludes to his life's way symbolically by the pictures of traveling. In Psalm 73, entitled A Psalm of Asaph, he writes, But as for me, my feet had almost stumbled. My steps had nearly slipped. Verse 2 of Psalm 73. He's not speaking of physically stumbling and falling, but that of a spiritual fall. Hannah, the mother of Samuel in the Old Testament, writes in her song, He will guide the feet of his faithful ones, but the wicked shall be cut off in darkness. For not by might shall a man prevail. 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 9. It is obvious in our passage today, the psalmist is not concerning himself with the condition of his feet, but that of his soul, and as such has entrusted himself to the Lord for guidance in his life. He is not depending upon his own strength and might to overcome evil, but in the Lord to protect him. The first is the positive, to be led. The last part of the verse is that which will keep wickedness, evil, vanity, iniquity, and such from ruling his life. If this is familiar in its passage, consider the verse from the New Testament. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 13. In Paul's letter to the Romans, he writes in chapter 6, Let not sin therefore reign in your mortal body, to make you obey its passions. Do not present your members to sin as instruments for unrighteousness, but present yourself to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and your members to God as instruments for righteousness. For sin will not have dominion over you, since you are not under law, but under grace. Romans 6:12 through 14. Sin reigning and having dominion in our lives. Which of us was strong enough to overcome sin and lead a sinless life apart from God? If we think we are, it's time we think again. Paul writes to Timothy in what is commonly believed to be his last letter recorded for us. In 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 12, he writes, Which is why I suffer as I do. But I'm not ashamed, for I know whom I have believed, and I am convinced that he is able to guard until that day what has been entrusted to me. Paul is not alone in his faith for God to guard what has been entrusted by him. The book of Revelation is filled with the promise of those who have overcome through the Lamb. Have your steps been directed by God? Lord willing, we'll see you again tomorrow.